Hello, welcome back to my channel and the first part of my Fighting Fantasy gamebook retrospective, where I'm going to go through each of the gamebooks in order and play them again and revisit them after all these years and see what I think of them. So of course we're starting with the Warlock of Firetop Mountain. Released in 1982 when I was 10 years old, it was reprinted 8 times in a year. That's how successful it was. A huge part of my childhood. And it's strange all these years later to come back to it, and it's so small and so simple and straightforward. But before we get into the game proper, let's talk about what the game books got so right and why they were so successful. First of all, the game itself. We take it for granted, but it was a bit of genius from Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone. The whole thing of skill, stamina and luck, testing your luck, how they did the battles. From someone who at 10 years old tried to play Dungeons and Dragons and could not understand the rules to save his life and gave up on it. What Jackson and Livingstone got so right was they devised a gaming system that was simple and accessible to anyone who wanted to play, but gave you enough gameplay that it was enjoyable and you get involved in it. And I think we take that for granted as Fighting Fantasy fans, but it was such an ingenious system. It got you going straight away, you could get into it, but there was enough that it made the game complex enough and enjoyable enough to play. The second element that they got so right was the artwork. Now the interior illustrations are by Russ Nicholson, and he gets them so right. Right from the beginning, it's the perfect combination of like realism and comic book, horror and fantasy. Just look at this illustration. Look at that. A rotting corpse coming to life as a vampire. Oh my God, this was in a book for kids, but it's fantastically real. Look at this image, this kind of strange lamprey eel emerging out of a riverbank. It's absolutely terrifying. Some incredible images. Look at these zombies with their eyes lolling up towards the heavens. And there's a corpse in the corner. Incredible. Really frightening nightmare fodder, but absolutely essential for getting you into this dark realm of this warlock's, maze underneath this mountain. But the other thing that I think we should remember about the art is, if you go back and read Warlock of Firetop Mountain again, you can see the influence of Dungeons and Dragons. It's very simplistically written, right? So there's no big build-up in terms of characterization or story. It's basically telling you, you're going in this dungeon, you're trying to find some treasure, that's it. It even tells you that you're supposed to find keys. It gives you hints, right? So you don't have to work out the game so much. It pretty much tells you what to do. And, I used to think the one thing I didn't like about this book was the bloody maze that you get to about 2/3 of the way through. And I still hate that maze. And I still can't get through the damn thing, even when making a map. But actually, if you go back to the book, it's very repetitive. From the very first pages. All the rooms you go to, they're described like a dungeon master would describe it to people playing a game. So it says, you go into a room, it's a square room, there's a table, there's a box underneath, and there's always a straw mattress in the corner. You watch out for it. It's incredibly repetitive even before you get to the maze. But what Russ Nicholson and the book writers got so right was that the images in the book, the illustrations, are not just monsters or beings or goblins. They also do simple images like this one. Looking across the river, the bell for the boatman, the jetty. This gives you a realistic feel that you're actually in the dungeon. Just setting it up, like the words are setting up. The dungeon master's words tell you where you are. The images tell you where they are. They make you feel the reality of it. Look at this image, just a simple bench with a sign saying, "Rest ye here, weary traveller." This is the secret texture of Warlock of Firetop Mountain that made it so real and so enjoyable to play and so believable. As I say, when you go back and play it, it's pretty simple actually. You kind of find out what's the right route and the right things to do pretty straightforwardly. One of the things that amuses me about going back to this book, it doesn't try to be a proper story like some of the later Fighting Fantasy books. So you've got all these kind of random things happening. You go into a room and there's some bloke who wants to play you at dice. Another bloke's got a shop. How does that work? How does a shop work in a dungeon? I just don't get that at all. There's all these kind of random people and you think, how do they end up here and what are they doing here? One time you go into a room and there's 4 blokes, just chatting, and you sit down and have a chat with them. and they're in the middle of a maze. How did they get there? I know we shouldn't think about that kind of thing, but I can't help it really. I must admit, I really enjoyed playing this game up until the maze, which I thought was a bit of a mistake. And I don't think that when you finally get to the Warlock, Zagor, there's enough compensation for going through that maze. I mean, if you go back to that end scene with Zagor, it's not built up very much. It's not described very much. You get this old bloke who suddenly transforms into a wizard, and then you're fighting him. There's no sort of build-up, there's no texture, there's no excitement. It's very straightforward, and a bit of a letdown, if we're honest. A bit of a letdown. But this is the book where it all started, so I think we've all got enormous affection for it with that original cover. I've got, it's huge nostalgia for me, this book. I must admit, I have more nostalgia these days for the art by Russ Nicholson than I do for the game. But it's a great place to start, and I think Jackson and Livingston deserve huge credit for the brilliant idea they had of bringing fantasy fiction together with this simple but very likeable gameplay. Next time, I'll be looking at Citadel of Chaos.